Hello, everybody. I'm welcoming now all of you, to the What's the Plan? So what's the plan here with my first English-speaking guest, Professor Andreas Rasche. Andreas, he is a professor at CBS, and he's one of those kind of professors that actually, when you learn something in school today, then you can read it on Andreas Ratsche's LinkedIn profile the very next day, because he's not only teaching what's going on in the books, he's actually putting the whole world into the books and into live updating what's going on. So he's one of those professors that I dreamt about when I was at university, when wars was going out outside the window. If you're not following Andreas Rasche already on LinkedIn, you should do that, because then you will get a live update on everything regarding ESG and also all those negotiations which is going on at the moment. So I'm very pleased to welcome you, Andreas Rasche. Thank you for always joining what I'm asking you to do, because I know there's so many other people who want you to take part in this. And I would also right now thank you for the colleagues I have from your school who have actually learned stuff from you, which actually make them able to turn things into solutions in everyday situations for companies. So I'm very proud to have you here. And without further introduction, maybe you could add a little more about what you are doing at the moment.
Yeah, so thank you very much indeed, Lotte, for inviting me. And yes, I mean, what I'm doing at the moment, I'm researching EU sustainability regulations, as well as boards of directors, corporate governance. So these are my two big topics. On the EU regulation side, obviously, I have followed the omnibus process quite closely, and also did research on it in various different forms. So yeah, it's keeping me busy. As you say, it's a very swiftly moving field, but it's also, I think, very fun to follow. I mean, not fun in terms of content, but fun in terms of the practical insights that you can generate.
Okay, yes. And maybe before sticking into the problems as we used to do here, and so what's the plan? I would just like you to just shortly, if that's possible, describe the kind of mental overload, geopolitical overload for those who have to take decisions regarding ESG and regarding the legislation around companies. So how can you actually, if you do this outside in perspective, a risk analysis on the whole atmosphere going on, how would you describe that?
Yeah, I mean, there is indeed a lot going on, and I think it is increasingly difficult for executives in companies, big and small, to really cut through everything that is going on. So you have the trade wars, you have artificial intelligence, you have security concerns around Israel, around Ukraine, and other conflicts in the world. And then in the midst of this, you have also sustainability, which in some sense is also related to it. I mean, look at the conflict in Ukraine, which brought the entire discussion of energy security to our door. And we here in Europe, we're still very much dependent on fossil fuels, and decarbonizing the economy at the end of the day, of course, is not just a sustainability program, but it is also a program in terms of making Europe more autonomous. So I think all of this kind of plays a role, of course, when you analyze the situation today, and some of these things have led to what I would say is a sustainability backlash in recent months, maybe years, characterized by deregulation in the US, also by ideological debates, the culture wars around DEI and climate. But on the other hand, I think we are also seeing lots of progress, and we shouldn't kind of always just look at these negative things and believing that everything is a backlash. And maybe we can also kind of cover that throughout the conversation here today, that this, of course, the progress that we're making is also important.
And maybe we should just, when you say there is a kind of connection, maybe we should stick into that just to hear your point of view on that. How close do you think we ought to put those two things together? Is it like now we need to solve the geopolitical situation first, and then we can say the climate after? Or is it related, and is it also economic related? When you read, as I know you have the Draghi report, it was actually closely related in his report, but that was actually also before new president coming up, a new geopolitical situation. So how close I'm sure you wouldn't say it's not related. So
No,
in
not
somehow you
not
would
at
say
all.
it related, but how would you describe this relation, and how is the one part actually also an opportunity for the other?
Hmm. Yeah, I would describe the relationship between geopolitics and sustainability as complementary, right? So they complement each other. And I think it is a fundamental mistake to kind of believe this is an either or. You either have you either take care of the geopolitical battles or you do sustainability. I do not think this works. I mean, Draghi in his report, he raised very much the question of energy security. So he kind of basically said one of the problems in Europe right now are high energy prices, right? High energy prices. This is what makes us what makes us lack economic competitiveness. And he's right about that. I mean, energy prices compared to other regions of the world are too high. Why? Well, because we are still kind of hanging on pretty expensive ways of generating energy. The other issue is the autonomy around critical raw materials. So Europe is not autonomous when it comes to raw materials. We depend a lot. We depend mostly actually on China when it comes to rare earths and other critical minerals. And these are again needed for the clean transition. These are needed, for instance, for solar, for wind, in order to create capacity there. So this is one of the reasons why China is outpacing us in terms
Yeah.
of energy generation, right? China added in the first half of 2025 212 gigawatts of solar power to their grid. This is by far more than the entirety of Europe has added, and it just shows how significant the change is.
So, and this is the kind of the system analysis about this whole thing, and I'm of course happy to hear that you think they're closely connected. But if you see it from a company perspective, why should the one company care? Because isn't it like prisoner's dilemma? If you get the iron you need, or whatever you might need from your supply chain, and you actually have good connections down there, why shouldn't other than bother? And how could we translate what you're saying at the moment about the connection to a business everyday language? Because that's the whole problem here when you see these disillusionated companies at the
Yeah,
moment.
yeah,
How would you
yeah.
translate it, and how would you put is it actually something that is need to be handled in the companies, or is it good to be handled?
No, it has to be handled. I mean, just let's stick to raw materials as an example, right? I mean, raw materials, critical raw materials, if you are in the, for instance, energy generation sector, you need access to these raw materials. So then, of course, global supply chains come into focus, but then also it's not just about security of supply, but also the risks that are embedded in these supply chains. If you talk about risk, you talk about the risk of disruption, and the risk of disruption of the supply chain also relates to environmental and social factors, right? Because these supply chains can equally be disrupted because, for instance, a supply factory is flooded, or because you have community pushback against human rights violation. So I think companies need to adopt this broader perspective, and also I would say a risk-related perspective, in order to see that that securing supply in a world that is characterized by geopolitical turmoil basically requires that you manage these risks in a proactive way, and that you really have good systems in place. And that's why sustainability information, everybody sometimes complains about the CSRD and CSDDD and it's too much work and so on. No, I mean, this is giving you the type of information that you need for today's management. And so it is, in a sense, a natural step further. I think it is just not something we got used to, and this is where the cognitive hurdle is.
And if we then look at the companies, and they believe in what you are saying, how much help do they then get from Europe and the European Union at the moment? Maybe you could just describe what shortly, for those who haven't read all your updates. Where are we at the moment? What kind of legislations I'm waiting for very shortly, but what kind of structural things and legislations are coming from the European Union at the moment, and how can we what is most what should they expect?
Yes, I mean we are at a quite decisive moment, I would say. So the first von der Leyen Commission, they launched the so-called Green Deal 2019, and this was followed by a lot of different legislation. There was the CSRD, the Reporting Directive, the CSDDD, the Due Diligence Directive, EUDR, the Deforestation Directive. So lots of things happening, and rightly so. And now with the second commission, the second von der Leyen Commission, unfortunately, deregulation, they call it simplification, but essentially it boils down to deregulation. Deregulation is very high on the agenda because they believe they can save compliance costs. And if you save compliance costs, you make companies more competitive. Unfortunately, as the name indicates, it is a pure cost-focused debate. So if you only look at costs, then of course, it makes sense to kind of say, okay, we slash these regulations and we save whatever 3 billion euros a year throughout Europe, and that is good. But on the other hand, these reporting directives, they also bring a lot of benefits to companies, and these were not assessed when the proposal was kind of given. So this is where we are right now. Politicians try to push through simplifications, very significant simplifications. By the way, we talk about scope reductions of these directives of minus 90% on the CSRD, minus 70% on the CSDDD. So this is very, very significant. And it will basically leave us, I think, from 2026 onwards with a discourse where we need to discuss much more voluntary commitments, again, towards reporting and due diligence, but from a different perspective than 5 or 6 years ago, because nowadays you have a very different market environment.
I think it's very right to say that the whole discussion about regulation and deregulation now happens to be like, if you just deregulate, then the competitive power and the market energy will work out itself. And you say that's not how it works. So let's just stick to what this program is all about. So what's the plan? So what should and when you read the budget for the EU the coming 7 years, there is some very interesting thoughts there, but it's always coming up in 7 years, and the companies are very disillusioned, as I told you. And actually, from a climate perspective, there's also very much to be disillusioned about. So if you should say this innovation that you're asking for, which also actually was a central part of both the Draghi report and the Green Deal, what is then needed? What should maybe you could first tell me, what should the politicians do to actually push forward the situation that this is turning into a competitive power? How could they do more to help the companies?
I mean, if they really want to push competitiveness is an enormously complex construct. And the politicians right now believe, so we kind of slash a bit of cost and this will make companies more competitive. But this is too simple. So competitiveness, if you really want to push competitiveness, ensure access to skilled workers. This is one of the clear bottlenecks in many, many European economies, that there is no access to skilled workers. If you want to ensure competitiveness, make sure that there is a really good digital infrastructure. I'm German by birth. I can tell you that many regions in Germany do not have access to really good digital infrastructure. It is a problem. Ensure also a good physical infrastructure, good rail, good roads. These kind of things, this environment, this is what pushes competitiveness in the long run. And then, of course, we need to make sure that companies, and they are right about that, do not spend too much time on administrative burden, so that we can set up companies quickly, that companies can get funding quickly, particularly small companies that then need to grow. So all of this, I think, these are the measures we need to work on. However, we spend a lot of time working on deregulating sustainability regulations, and I think we are not spending our energy on the right things, because all the things that I just talked about, I think we should spend more energy on this.
And maybe now you're talking about the German situation, and as you know, you are German. So, and I've talked with some of my other guests about the German car industry, and which is interesting because actually one of the leaders of the car industries just said to a debate a couple of weeks ago, Connie Hedegaard told me that maybe they had been lobbying too much for keeping the situation as it was, and not fighting for being in the front for those innovation that you're actually asking for. So how would you also describe the whole climate around taking political decisions when actually the big companies have been actually not asking for help for innovation, but more like being in a bubble, keeping the situation as it was? How would that whole situation need to change? Because that's what I'm afraid of, actually. I'm afraid of that now, not only on the compliance level, but also on the innovation level, it will be too incremental. There won't be those powerful companies who would say we need to rethink this in a much more transformative way, because otherwise, as you said in the beginning, the Chinese will just overtake everything. What they will what they will do if we do nothing, it's already happening.
Yeah, there is not enough pressure on companies, and companies don't want the pressure, right? I mean, electrical vehicles is a good example. The German car manufacturers, the big German car manufacturers, they were not buying into this for a very long time, and the rest of the world moved on. The Chinese car manufacturers moved on, Tesla moved on, and now the Germans need to play catch up. And even under this scenario, they are still kind of lobbying, for delaying the combustion engine, the end of the combustion engine sale of cars by 2035. I mean, that is the goal, and they're still lobbying against that. So they are trying to clinging to what they have, trying to use really make the most out of the technologies, and they are not radical enough, I think, in terms of really also accepting risks. And I think this is maybe something that we in Europe need to become better of. And I very much include myself here. We are not risk takers in a sense, right? Whereas in the US, you find more risk takers, also more optimistic people, that kind of are willing to take these risks. Here in Europe, we complain a lot and we do not take these risks. And there is actually a good survey by Edelman basically showing how much we lack optimism in Europe. And I think, this is for me also one of the key enablers. If you're not optimistic about the future, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in the end.
Yeah, and we have both, I'm sure, read some of the German theoretical thinkers as Weber and some other, and Kant, and all those who put all this being fair and being everybody should be transcendence, what is going on during the bureaucracy. Everybody should have the same opportunities to not exclude everybody. So maybe how would you, and now you're following actually the political negotiations on an everyday level, how would you reconstruct? How would we need a reconstruction on how we're doing things here in Europe to make those innovation more transformative? Because it seems like those small pieces is not making it, even though everybody, and that is actually seen from an outside-in perspective really crazy, because now I've talked to a lot of politicians, the majority of politicians, they all want this. And also the majority, at least of those companies who are not in the old industry, they also want these transformations to happen. But it seems like it's not going in that direction.
I think we do not have enough focus on these small companies, these startups, these scale-ups that really push innovation in other economies. And I think we need to find ways. First of all, we need a common legal form, and the EU is working on this. They call it the 28th regime, right? And I think this is really something. We need a common legal corporate code so that companies can register as a kind of European company and that they can raise capital from all the markets easily. So why not use the single market more than we have? So we need to use that more, and also kind of lower some of the barriers for companies to access funding, to access risk capital, so that this becomes something that that pushes them at the end of the day. So I think politicians can do things. And they should, however, they should not focus so much on the bigger companies, because I think the innovations and the dynamic comes from the smaller companies. And I think European politicians are often too much focused on the big players, and they try to please them because, of course, they do all the lobbying and so on.
And those things that you're talking about right now, do you think that is coming up, or is it still missing? How much more do we need to do?
Yeah, I actually, to be fair, I think the current commission, I mean, as you know, I'm quite critical of the omnibus and so on, but I think the current commission is doing things in that direction. We see work around the 28th regime. We have an investment omnibus package, which actually has good suggestions in there. So I think we are the politicians try to set the right framework. I think what the politicians probably cannot easily regulate is the culture change that we need. And this is when it comes to the optimism. You cannot regulate optimism, or you cannot force people, to be risk takers. So I think this is something that needs to grow organically over time. And here, maybe once we have the first big, really European success stories that of companies that really also become global players and do not just sell off their technologies towards the US or being bought by Chinese players, then I think once we have these success stories, I think it will become easier.
Yeah, and I would wish I would have the same hope. And it's actually interesting for me to talk with people close to the EU, because they all say the same. And when I talk to small and medium-sized companies, they are just filled up with regulation from plastic, from garbage, from everything. Actually, also from chemical regulation, which I was actually with the REACH directive fighting for earlier in my life. But it seems like all these directives are actually just right now landing at the tables at the small companies. And at the same time, all what you're talking about when saying that the big companies with the CSRD would do something, that is not what the smaller ones realize. It seems like they're just putting all the power to their own head offices and their own reports. And when could we expect that this is actually trickling down to those small companies? Because what I'm afraid of is actually that no small companies and people living in all Europe would turn to a more right-wing orientated solution, because they can't see these things that you're talking about in their daily lives. So maybe to end this interview one more time, what should the politicians do to actually get these things done, as you say, a little faster? And maybe also then what could the big companies do? And last, what could the small companies do themselves to try to be more open on this transformation that we all hope is coming? So that was 3 different things you should do here in the end.
3 different things. Yeah. I mean, I think on the speed, this is difficult, because the EU, to be quite honest, is not designed for speed. But I fully see the concern. Actually, the omnibus process that we talked about, that was a pretty swift process so far. Whenever I tell people, this all of this has happened within like 12 months time, they're like, oh, that's long. And I say, no, that's actually pretty fast for the EU, right? But I think I'm fully with those who kind of say we need to become faster here. We need to kind of simplify the process within reason. Of course, we cannot kind of put down democratic safeguards. We need to do it within reason. I'm also very concerned about, for instance, Omnibus 1 didn't get any impact assessment, even though the changes are so significant. So the European Ombudswoman needs to decide on that. But I think we need to simplify this legislative system, and I think there are probably possibilities to do this, to really squeeze it, so that the small companies that you talked about, that they really feel it. On the big companies, your second point, well, what can they do? I would say responsible lobbying is one important part, because we unfortunately see also a bit of inconsistency between what these companies often say in public and then what they do behind closed doors and the letters they sign. I also was among those who exposed this kind of letter by the Evian Summit, 46 European or German and French CEOs kind of asking for the complete abolishment of CSDDD, even though on their websites of the companies, you read all sorts of nice statements. So I think consistency and probably also a bit of more support for these regulations, because they are well intended, and you can simplify also within the system. Simplification does not always need to imply regulation. The last part, the small businesses, well, that's tricky. I mean, because they don't have so much of a voice, and that's why I'm always concerned. They're not heard. So I think I think what is important for small businesses is that, and this is maybe a job for the business associations, to really find ways to make their voices heard. I recently also on a webinar interacted with people from SME United in Brussels, and they have a strong voice for SMEs. But of course, this is not nation state specific. So I think we need to find better ways to also represent the voices of smaller companies and to take into consideration what they want. So that for me would be one very important step.
Yeah, and I totally agree on all your points. And the last point is something I'm working on in my daily life. It's actually how to put the SMEs back into an innovation process, and within that you should just rethink how you make your supply chains working and how you do public procurement and private procurement, how you actually how you ask for stuff, and maybe you could be more curious when you ask for stuff. But maybe here in ending this, so what's the plan? I think you gave some good homework for everybody now. Turning back to the geopolitical situation and turning back to Europe's situation, how would you describe Europe's competitive power in 3 years, and what would be the 3 major steps, or maybe 3 to 5 years? What would be the 3 major steps needed to be done to make a sustainable train going to push forward the European power against China and the States, and also the emerging markets?
I'm actually quite hopeful when it comes to Europe. I mean, I see the political problems that we have right now due to the way that the parliament is assembled, and these kind of alliances. And rest assured, I do not like that the EPP maybe teams up with far right parties. But I'm hopeful for Europe, and I think what is definitely needed for this hope to really materialize is that we get energy prices right, because this is what is holding us back. So that's my first main point. We really need to aggressively push decarbonization. Unfortunately, with the climate goal that was negotiated, I do not really see this aggression. I must say it is. We are still kind of putting on the brakes, and this is not good. But on the other hand, of course, we are doing already quite a bit. And in terms of our overall reduction, we are by and large on track. So that is good. Second point, as we discussed, we need to get the startup scene right. We need to get the entire scene of small companies, innovative small companies, that we really help them to become global players in this environment. And third, we need to get the single market right, because we are not using the single market sufficiently. We are always talking about the single market, but we still then source from the US and China and other parts of the world. Let's make Made in Europe really a sign, and really something also to be proud of. And I think if we go that direction, there is a lot of room for hope. And what was not among the 3 was simplification, because I do not think that I understand where it comes from, and I also support it within limits, but I do not think it is a deal breaker at the end of the day. I think we need to do it. We need to kind of reduce the complexity of some of the frameworks so that they become easier to handle. But this is not what really decides the fate of Europe at the end of the day.
And that was really good. I just have 2 questions on your 2 latest remarks. So the single market, would you then actually think that we should, are we actually too much into a global fair trade mindset in Europe, because everybody is actually more focused on their own market? Should we actually stick back to where we came from when the European, when Europe was born, and then say we actually only buying stuff from those who are also morally behaving like we want them to? Is it in that direction you think we should go?
Well, I think we should, of course, give ourselves clear rules. There is the Brussels effect, right? That has been well described also in theory, and I think we should keep on using that effect. But what I mean with the single market is also we need to build supply chains within Europe. That we source within Europe to the extent possible, and that we do not always turn automatically to China or the US or other world regions, so that we strengthen Europe. Because once you do this, then of course you also push the European economy, you push the infrastructure, and I for me at least, that is a big hope.
And my last question would be, those small and medium-sized companies that we have in Europe, would you think they are better off actually taking part in this innovation thing, or is it actually just something that we hope? Do they might be better educated, or would they actually could participate better in this? Is it still kind of a European strength, or is it just something that I'm dreaming of?
No, I think we have a lot of smart people. We have a lot of innovation in Europe. We can just not put it into products and services, and a lot of the innovation also that became global innovation. I'm always telling the story of the MP3 file format, which was developed in Germany, and then it was capitalized on in the US. And you have a lot of these stories, right, where innovation came from Europe, and then the capitalization of this actually happened somewhere else. The Google Earth technology, so for kind of, that nowadays gives us the maps and so on, again, that came from Europe and was then used in the US. There are countless of these stories. We are innovative in Europe. We just need to learn to really capitalize on it.
Okay, Andreas Rasche, then we just ended up with also the financial problem in this and the investing problem in this, and how they also can support this transformation. I'm so very honored that you just actually answered my question so direct, and I'm sure it's also because you're German, so when I'm telling you should come up with 3 answers, then you're actually coming up with 3 answers, which is fantastic. And so much good work you are doing. Thank you so much for participating in So What's the Plan? And I will follow your LinkedIn, and everybody else should do this. And I'm just hoping that everything what you're saying is right. I'll do what I can to make it happen. So thank you so much for joining here.
Thank you very much indeed for inviting me, Lotte. Much appreciated.